At the edge of the Bass Strait, where the Southern Ocean folds itself into long grey ribbons of surf, a different kind of network hums beneath the roar of the waves. It isn't electronic or engineered, but living, made of water, pressure and instinct. Australian fur seals thrive in this liminal space, where land becomes noise and the sea becomes signal. From a distance, their colonies appear chaotic, a dense brown shimmer of bodies pressed across granite ledges, punctuated by the constant rasp of barks, growls, and the metallic clang of breaking surf. But beneath that bedlam lies a pattern of exquisite coordination, one refined not by social agreement, but by evolutionary necessity. For every seal sprawled in the sun, another listens through the water, tuned to a frequency few species can hear, the tremor of predators moving through surf. The colony lives in two worlds. Above, the air thickens with salt and fur oil. Gulls wheel and pick at scraps. Newborn pups bleat for mothers returning from the hunt. Below, a separate language flows. The low-frequency murmur of the sea floor, the muffled booms of surf colliding with rock, and the subtle shifts that announce an approaching shape. The Australian fur seal's auditory world is a moving puzzle of echoes and resonances, where meaning depends on motion. These seals inhabit the surf line, a danger zone that's also a defense zone. Here, breaking waves create what scientists call acoustic windows, short bursts of quieter underwater intervals between crashes. It's in those fleeting silences that a seal's ear becomes a radar dish. When a great white shark approaches, often from below, under the cover of suspended sand, the water tells on it. Pressure waves fan out from its motion, and the changing density of water distorts the background rumble of surf. In the chaos of whitewater, a single deviation, a hole in the rhythm, can mean the difference between life and death. Hydrophones placed near these colonies reveal patterns that are astonishingly consistent. Alarm calls and frantic dives erupt just milliseconds after these quiet breaks. The colony doesn't react to what it sees, it reacts to what it hears, or rather, what it stops hearing. It's tempting to describe this as superstition or coincidence, until you map the physics. The crash of waves generates constant broadband noise that masks low-frequency predator cues. But as each wave recedes, it drags air bubbles and sand particles away, creating a short-lived drop in background decibels. For seals evolved with sensitive underwater hearing, these drops open a brief auditory window into the invisible. It's like listening for a whisper between thunderclaps. To a fur seal, the sea isn't random sound, it's pulse, interval, and rhythm. Their survival depends on hearing when the pattern breaks. The pups, barely a few weeks old, learn this through mimicry. When mothers dive, they rarely do so in silence. A short bark or head flick sends pups scrambling towards safer ground. The colony's edge, the surf-exposed zone, functions as both training ground and alarm system. Each returning mother brings back not just milk, but information, the direction of current, the presence of predators, the recent rhythm of the sea. In this sense, fur seals run an acoustic economy, exchanging signals of safety and threat through both behavior and physics. Every movement reinforces the colony's collective awareness. Even the geometry of the rookeries seems tuned to sound. Colonies prefer narrow, amphitheater-like coves where the cliffs reflect surf noise inward, amplifying cues from the open water. These natural echo chambers aren't just defensive, they're communicative. When hundreds of bodies vocalize against the walls, the resulting reverb creates a rolling chorus that can carry across kilometers. To a human listener, it's chaos. To a seal, it's a map, one that tells who's calling, who's diving, and how close danger is. The idea that the ocean could serve as a kind of radio, transmitting coded warnings through noise itself, redefines how we think about predator-prey communication. For seals, the ocean isn't simply medium, it's messenger. Sharks and orcas move silently, but their silence disturbs a symphony the seals know by heart. The pattern recognition here borders on cognitive art. Individuals remember soundscapes, learn which frequencies signal turbulence versus danger, and share reactions fast enough to ripple across hundreds of meters. When one seal bolts, it's not panic, it's signal propagation. Yet this listening life comes with cost. The same dense colonies that magnify safety through sound also attract attention. Great whites learn the patterns too. They linger in the peripheries, waiting for confusion, when rain, wind, or human noise overwhelms the natural surf static. In those conditions, attacks spike. The predator understands that when the ocean grows too loud, the radio breaks. The balance between noise and silence, between detection and concealment, is as fragile as the seal's coastal world itself. There's a strange symmetry to their existence. Noise protects, but also confines. The ocean's roar gives them cover to rest and rear young, yet when storms intensify or human shipping invades, that cover becomes distortion. Studies show that vessel traffic, even distant, can scramble these natural acoustic rhythms, masking the subtle cues seals rely on. A single container ship generates underwater noise up to 180 decibels, flattening the soundscape like static. In that static, predators move freely, unseen, unannounced. For a species that listens to survive, it's a kind of sensory blindness. To watch an Australian fur seal colony at dawn is to witness this tension play out in rhythm. The first waves of morning crash in from the open ocean, booming through the shallows. Pups stir, gulls cry, the colony erupts into synchronized motion. A mother slides into the surf, disappears under a breaker, and surfaces meters away, head angled, ears twitching against the hiss of foam. She pauses, a brief stillness, then dives again. Each dive a scan, each breath a recalibration of what the ocean is saying today. Beneath her, the hydrophone would record a series of rhythmic troughs, tiny valleys of quiet between waves. It's there, in those fleeting silences, that the real communication begins. If you could translate that underwater world into visible form, it might look like radio waves, peaks and dips, carrying information across an invisible channel. In truth, that's exactly what the sea is, a living transmitter, its frequencies shaped by wind, current, rock, and biology. The fur seal is both listener and broadcaster, a creature whose safety depends not just on reflex, but on interpretation. Its awareness is a form of decoding. The ocean speaks, and evolution has taught the seal to hear. And so the question lingers, can the ocean be a radio? Not one built by humans, but one tuned by life itself. In the fur seal's world, every crash and pause, every bubble and hiss is data, streamed, filtered, and understood through flesh. The ocean doesn't need antennas or transmitters, it only needs listeners who've learned its grammar. And among the granite coves of southern Australia, those listeners are legion, sleek, scarred, and endlessly alert, translating the surf into survival, one quiet second at a time. Before the sun breaks the canopy, before heat pools in the gullies and insects begin to rise, a ripple of sound rolls through the gum trees. It begins as a murmur, a soft chuckle at the forest's edge, then swells into raucous, overlapping waves of laughter. It is not random noise, It is a proclamation, a signature, and a signal, the morning chorus of the Kookaburra. Across the eucalypt ridges of eastern Australia, these calls arrive with near-perfect timing, like orchestras tuning in different valleys. Each burst is both celebration and warning. We are here. This patch of forest is occupied. To the human ear, it sounds joyous, but within that sound lies strategy. Kookaburras live by sound as seals live by surf. Their voices shape invisible boundaries through the forest, acoustic fences maintained not by walls, but by reputation. They are territorial birds, loyal to family groups that may persist for decades, occupying the same range generation after generation. In such stable societies, conflict is costly and cooperation essential. That is why their laughter carries more meaning than amusement. It is both deterrent and drill, a coordinated performance that reminds neighbors of strength without bloodshed. The dawn chorus, often described as a riot of joy, is in truth a military exercise disguised as music. Under the mottled light of early morning, a family unit gathers on a favored perch, a dead branch jutting from a tall gum, giving wide visibility across their range. One bird starts the sequence, often the dominant male or female, with a rapid ascending call that breaks into trills and cackles. Within seconds, others join in, overlapping tones until the sound thickens into a wall. It's synchronized chaos, a burst lasting half a minute, reverberating off trunks and valleys. Then silence. Across the next ridge, another group answers, their rhythm slightly different but equally forceful. Between them, the air carries a line of demarcation. The forest is divided by sound. But this is not just a statement of possession. Research has revealed something subtler. These choruses act as mock battles, rehearsals for conflict that train each group in timing, coordination, and group response. When scientists play back recorded calls of neighboring flocks, Kookaburras respond not with confusion, but with rallying cries. They cluster, align directionally, and call in counterpoint, just as they would in a real border confrontation. Over repeated mornings, the groups learn their neighbors' rhythms and adjust accordingly, an acoustic form of arms control. By participating in these predictable sonic exchanges, both sides reinforce familiarity and reduce the chance of physical raids. In this way, the forest's laughter becomes a peacekeeping mechanism. To grasp the sophistication of this system, one must understand Kookaburra society. Each group is a cooperative unit, typically composed of a breeding pair and their offspring from previous seasons. The older juveniles, known as helpers, forego breeding to assist their parents in defending territory and raising new chicks. This structure demands a high degree of coordination and communication. When the morning call rings out, every member plays a role, their positions across branches and canopy levels chosen for maximum acoustic coverage. A single mistimed start or lapse in synchronization could create weakness, an invitation for rivals to test their boundary. The chorus thus becomes both signal and social glue, reinforcing hierarchies while maintaining cohesion. The mechanics of their voice only deepen the intrigue. The Kookaburra's laughter is a complex medley of rising and falling notes that stretch across nearly 2 octaves. Each phase of the call carries distinct information. The initial bursts draw attention, the middle cackles convey group size and vigor, and the final rapid-fire chuckles indicate unity. In playback experiments, rival groups react more strongly to recordings of well-coordinated choruses than to those of disorganized calls, suggesting that precision itself conveys dominance. In essence, a tidy laugh says, "Our family is strong. Our territory is stable. Approach at your peril." Through this acoustic diplomacy, whole forests develop what could be called chorus maps, overlapping sound territories that keep violence at bay. From a distance, a researcher can chart these invisible borders simply by noting the call and response pattern at dawn. The same ridges echo with the same laughter year after year, showing remarkable territorial fidelity. These networks of sound even shape other species' behaviors. Smaller birds, hearing the kookaburras' dawn claims, often time their own songs around the gaps, using the predictable laughter as an environmental clock. In this way, the kookaburra doesn't just defend territory, it orders the forest's temporal rhythm. Yet their system is not without risk. Silence invites intrusion. When drought or habitat disturbance scatters a family, the once familiar morning drill collapses. Neighboring groups detect the absence within days and push their boundaries forward, occupying the quiet. The forest's acoustic map redraws itself almost instantly, sound filling the void like water through a breached dam. In the long arc of Australia's shifting climate, this dynamic gives the kookaburra's voice ecological significance far beyond its own species. Their laughter shapes who feeds where, who breeds where, and how predator and prey distribute themselves across the bush. The irony is that the call most associated with carefree amusement is one of the continent's most disciplined signals. It serves multiple functions simultaneously: advertisement, alarm, and rehearsal. During the breeding season, it also becomes a family locator. Each pair recognizes the tonal fingerprint of its mate's voice within the group chorus. When danger looms, a short variant, the chortle call, rallies helpers to mob intruders, from goannas to snakes to rival kookaburras. These defense responses are rehearsed too. Juvenile helpers learn by imitation, responding to recordings long before they encounter a real threat. For them, laughter literally is survival training. Even the forest's acoustics play a role in shaping these calls. Eucalyptus woodlands scatter sound unevenly, trunks reflect, leaves absorb, and temperature gradients bend it unpredictably. Morning air, cool and dense, transmits low frequencies best. That's why kookaburras sing at dawn, when sound carries farthest. As the day warms, rising thermals distort the air's density, shortening the reach of each note. The birds don't just choose dawn for its symbolism, they exploit its physics. Imagine then, standing at the edge of a misted gully at first light. The calls begin, one, then several, then hundreds, overlapping across the horizon like a living waveform. It's not unlike a forest-sized communication array, each bird an emitter, each valley a resonant chamber. Within seconds, the soundscape stabilizes into territories, every family accounted for. To the untrained ear, it's a wild laugh. To the birds, it's the morning census, the calibration of peace. The kookaburra's genius lies in turning social maintenance into spectacle. By embedding cooperation within aggression and discipline within noise, it achieves what many species can't: stability through performance. Its laughter unites and divides simultaneously, a sound that enforces hierarchy while preventing open war. It's an evolutionary paradox that works because the forest itself amplifies it. The more laughter spreads, the fewer battles erupt. In this sense, every dawn chorus is both threat and treaty. So, can laughter guard a forest? In the kookaburra's world, yes. It can guard generations of nest hollows, feeding grounds, and the very structure of community. Their calls stitch together a landscape of coexistence through practiced intimidation and practiced harmony, a delicate balance that turns sound into structure. As sunlight pours across the gums and the last echoes fade, the forest feels momentarily still, secure within its web of laughter. And in that brief calm, evolution's logic becomes clear. Sometimes the best defense is not silence or flight, but the disciplined, defiant joy of being heard. At first light, the grasslands of inland Australia shimmer with dew and heat yet to come. The air is still, carrying the faint scent of eucalyptus and dry soil. Across the open plain, a mob of wallabies begins to stir. Their movements are quiet but deliberate, a soft chorus of hops, sniffs and pauses that turns the pale landscape into a living mosaic of watchfulness. To the casual eye, it is a tranquil scene. Animals grazing, mothers grooming their joeys, all framed by the golden haze of morning. But beneath that calm lies a subtle and unspoken hierarchy, one that governs who eats, who watches, and who risks becoming the warning signal for everyone else. Wallabies, like their larger kangaroo cousins, are social grazers shaped by exposure. They feed in open habitats, grasslands, coastal heaths, or the sparse edges of woodland, where cover is limited and predators can approach from nearly any direction. Survival here depends not only on speed or strength, but on perception. A single lapse in attention can mean an ambush by a dingo, a wedge-tailed eagle, or even a python waiting at the edge of a creek. Yet constant vigilance is costly. Every moment spent scanning the horizon is a moment not spent feeding or resting. Evolution, as always, demands compromise. And in the wallabies' world, that compromise has become a social contract, a system where individuals share, or sometimes exploit, the burden of awareness. The pattern is easiest to see from above. Drone footage of a grazing mob reveals a precise geometry, outer individuals spaced evenly along a ragged perimeter, ears swiveling, heads raised more often than those of the group's interior. These edge sentries are the first to spot movement, the first to freeze when a shadow crosses the grass. They are also the first to flee, or fall. Their position carries both privilege and peril, a clearer view but a higher risk of detection. Inside this living ring, others feed more freely, heads down, rhythmically cropping tufts of grass without lifting their gaze for long stretches. The center benefits from the periphery's vigilance. It's a strategy written not in conscious choice, but in probability and instinct, an emergent pattern that turns randomness into survival. From ground level, the structure feels more like tension than order. Each wallaby's ears are in constant motion, rotating independently to triangulate faint sounds. The smallest irregularity, a twig snap, a change in wind direction, ripples outward through the group in a wave of raised heads and pricked ears. One sentinel freezes, another mirrors the pose. For several seconds, the entire mob becomes statuesque, eyes fixed in the same direction. Then, as the threat resolves, perhaps just a gust rustling the spinifex, the line relaxes and feeding resumes. This synchronized freeze response isn't led by an alpha or coordinated through calls. It is self-organized vigilance, a form of collective sensing honed by generations of predation pressure. To understand why the edges remain occupied, scientists track individuals over time using high-resolution GPS collars. The data show that positions within the group aren't entirely random. Older, more experienced females, often those with juveniles in pouch, tend to remain near the core, where risk is lowest. Younger, or subordinate males, less invested in current offspring, occupy the outer ring more frequently. In effect, the group enforces a kind of vigilance tax. Individuals with less reproductive value at the moment pay the higher cost of alertness to safeguard the group's collective fitness. It's a quiet economy of risk. The sentries buy safety for others with seconds of lost feeding time, and sometimes with their lives. The costs of vigilance are measurable. A wallaby feeding undisturbed may lower its head for intervals of 15 to 20 seconds. On the perimeter, those intervals shrink to 3 or 4. Multiply that by hours of grazing, and the difference accumulates into lost energy, calories that translate into slower growth, lower fertility, and shorter endurance during drought. Yet evolution favors the system because the group as a whole prospers. A mob with attentive edges survives longer than one without, even if a few individuals pay disproportionate costs. Predators, too, have learned to exploit this structure. Dingoes approach from downwind, testing the ring's sensitivity. A skilled hunter may freeze for minutes, waiting for sentinels to relax, then dart forward during the briefest lapse. When one wallaby bolts, its thudding hops send vibrations through the ground and low-frequency sounds through the air, cues others detect instantly. Within seconds, the mob's configuration collapses into motion, an outward burst, then regrouping as survivors reconvene at a safer distance. Each event, though costly, sharpens the colony's pattern for next time. Over generations, this behavioral choreography becomes nearly instinctive. Interestingly, not all vigilance is equal. During the heat of day, when mirages distort vision, wallabies rely more on sound, listening for wing beats of eagles or the far-off bark of a dingo. At night, under moonlight, they switch back to sight, leveraging the reflective layer in their eyes that amplifies dim light. These adaptations blur the line between physiology and behavior. The vigilance tax isn't just social, it's sensory. Different individuals bring different detection advantages to the group, and their placement along the edge reflects this diversity. There's also a moral dimension, if one dares to use that word in ecology. Observations show that when danger passes, the sentries don't always rush to reclaim safer positions. Some linger at the edge, resuming their watch. Whether this represents altruism or simple habit is hard to say. In evolutionary terms, it may be both. Kin selection ensures that protecting relatives indirectly preserves one's genes. But in mixed mobs, unrelated wallabies still share the duty, suggesting a broader communal logic. In a landscape where threats move faster than thought, cooperation need not be conscious to be real. The open country amplifies every consequence of this system. In dense forest, cover hides individuals and predators alike. In grasslands, visibility levels the field. That visibility is what makes group vigilance so powerful and so necessary. When the wind is steady and the light sharp, the mob becomes a single organism with 100 rotating sensors. When the weather turns or the light dims, the network fragments and risk multiplies. Even subtle environmental changes, such as overgrazing that shortens the grass or storms that flatten terrain, can alter the group's vigilance geometry. The ecosystem's physical shape literally rewrites the rules of safety. And yet, within this seemingly mechanical system, moments of grace persist. Watch long enough, and you'll see wallabies take turns more fluidly than models predict. One individual lifts its head, scanning. Another, nearby, lowers to feed. After a few minutes, they switch. The exchange is seamless, almost polite. It hints at a level of awareness that transcends pure instinct. a sensitivity to the balance between hunger and fear that defines life on these plains. So who pays the vigilance tax? In truth, everyone does, though not equally or at the same time. The outer sentries pay with constant attention. The inner grazers pay by inheriting the responsibility when their turn comes. The tax shifts like the wind, distributed across the group in an ever-changing pattern of sightlines and shadows. No individual profits for long, and no one escapes entirely. It is a living example of shared cost, a social algorithm written in muscle and reflex rather than language. As dusk settles and the mob retreats toward the shelter of scrub and rock, the hierarchy dissolves. The day's tensions fade into collective stillness. Predators, too, quiet their movements, knowing the night now belongs to eyes and ears tuned for sound more than sight. The Wallabies' silhouettes merge with the land, their vigilance reduced to slow breaths and subtle turns of the head. Tomorrow, when the light returns, the cycle will begin again, the same geometry, the same quiet economy of risk. And in that endless exchange between fear and feeding, between center and edge, lies one of the oldest social systems in the animal world, proof that even in silence and stillness, cooperation speaks louder than any call. On a sunburned afternoon off the coast of Western Australia, the island seems almost asleep. Rottnest's air hangs heavy with the scent of salt and coastal heath. Waves whisper against pale limestone coves, and under the low shadows of melaleuca trees, something stirs, a soft rustle, followed by a blink of movement. Out from the tangle hops a creature so improbably serene it seems misplaced in this harsh world, the quokka. Rounded ears, soft fur, and an expression permanently caught between wonder and amusement. It is no surprise that this small marsupial has become known, inaccurately but affectionately, as the world's happiest animal. Yet beneath that photogenic calm lies one of the most unusual behavioral experiments in modern ecology, a species testing the edges of coexistence between wildness and human presence, between innocence and survival. The Quokkas story begins long before tourism and selfies, long before roads or ferries brought visitors to its island sanctuaries. Once, these small macropods ranged widely across southwestern Australia, grazing in open woodlands and seasonal swamps. But with the arrival of European settlement came cats, foxes, and habitat clearing, predators and pressures for which the Quokkas' gentle curiosity offered little defense. By the late 19th century, their mainland populations had collapsed into patchy pockets of survival. Only on predator-free offshore refugees like Rottnest Island and Bald Island did their numbers endure. Isolation, as it often does, reshaped them. On these predator-light islands, wariness faded. Generations grew up without the need to flinch at every sound. Curiosity, once a risk, became a neutral trait, or even an advantage in resource-rich, low-threat environments. Today, that same curiosity defines their behavior in a world that has changed again. Rottnest is no longer a closed ecosystem. It is a stage where wildlife and humans share close quarters. Here, Quokkas wander freely through tourist corridors, under cafe tables, along bicycle paths, even into open doorways, seemingly unfazed by the crush of bicycles and laughter. Their proximity to people appears to grant them an unexpected benefit. Predators keep their distance. Studies tracking motion-activated cameras show that feral cats and raptors, though present on the island's edges, are far less active near dense human traffic. It's a statistical pattern with evolutionary implications. Areas of high human presence serve as inadvertent refuges, micro-habitats of reduced predation risk. For Quokkas, humans have become an unintended form of armor. Yet the mechanism is not conscious partnership, it's ecological shadowing. Predators perceive humans as disturbance, unpredictable, noisy, and often dangerous. The smell of sunscreen and diesel, the rhythmic sounds of bicycles, even the shimmer of metal frames create a zone of avoidance. Within these zones, Quokkas feed longer, rest more openly, and exhibit more exploratory behavior. In drone footage comparing tourist pathways to remote scrub, Quokkas near people display shorter flight distances and more frequent group clustering. It's not just that they are less afraid. They are, in effect, using humanity's noise field as a protective shield. This human shield effect has been documented in other species: deer near suburban parks, penguins nesting near research bases, but few show it as vividly as the quokka. Their near-complete lack of aggression or startle reflex has turned into an ecological adaptation. When humans move through the island, they push the landscape's risk gradient outward, reducing predator activity. Quokkas that settle near these corridors thus gain safety without the biological cost of hypervigilance. The behavior isn't learned individually so much as inherited culturally through proximity. Young quokkas raised in human-dense areas grow up with a baseline of trust that their mainland ancestors could never afford. Still, the system is fragile. The quokka's armor depends on the very thing most ecosystems avoid: continuous human presence. When tourism slows, as during off-seasons or environmental restrictions, predator incursions creep back inward. Night vision studies have shown that cats probe further into populated zones during periods of reduced human movement. The refuge fluctuates with human behavior, turning the quokka's safety into a variable equation. What seems like friendliness from their perspective is, in evolutionary terms, a bet, one staked on our consistency. To witness this dynamic up close is to see adaptation in real time. In the twilight hours, when visitors disperse, quokkas emerge from the dunes to feed under dim orange streetlights. They graze methodically, rotating their heads to chew at knee-high sedges and succulents, their silhouettes round against the sand. A few remain nearer to the cafes, drawn to residual warmth and crumbs, while others edge toward the bush. Every minute, their micro-movements reveal a calculus of safety: distance from cover versus proximity to light, scent of people versus sound of rustling leaves. One false choice, and an owl or cat could break the illusion of peace. But on most nights, the system holds. The predators stay back, and the quokkas, oblivious to the invisible perimeter they've chosen, continue to feed. Curiosity, however, is double-edged. The same boldness that shields them here could doom them elsewhere. On the mainland, where foxes and raptors remain plentiful, reintroduced quokkas often fare poorly. They approach camera traps, explore scent stations, and linger in exposed areas where shyer species would hide. Their instinct to investigate becomes a liability, a behavior maladapted to environments without the buffer of human noise. The result is a behavioral mismatch: island-trained fearlessness meeting mainland danger. Conservationists now study whether these traits can be recalibrated through pre-release conditioning, training individuals to recognize predator cues again, to rebuild the instinct of fear. That experiment raises a deeper question: is it possible for evolution to relearn caution once it's forgotten? Behaviorally, perhaps yes. Genetically, it's slower. The island's small population size and long-term isolation may have already favored traits like reduced flight response and increased sociability. Over centuries, this could become a fixed personality bias, an evolutionary lock-in that makes the quokka's friendliness permanent. If so, its survival will remain tethered to human stewardship. We would not just be observers of this adaptation, but its co-authors. Ecologically, the quokka embodies a paradox, a wild animal thriving not by avoiding humanity, but by orbiting it. Its population density peaks along walking trails and campgrounds, tapering off in the silent interior. Drone mapping of thermal signatures shows the pattern clearly, glowing clusters near footpaths, dim voids elsewhere. From a behavioral perspective, these are not random wanderings. They're spatial decisions shaped by a learned geography of risk. For the quokka, civilization has become camouflage, but even camouflage must be managed. Overfamiliarity brings new threats, nutritional imbalances from scavenged food, disease transmission, altered reproductive cycles from artificial light. Each advantage breeds vulnerability. The line between coexistence and dependency grows thinner with every camera flash and misplaced snack. What began as ecological opportunism risks becoming ecological reliance. Still, in the quiet hours before dawn, when the island sleeps and the wind carries only the sound of waves, the quokkas revert to their older rhythm. They gather in small groups under the tea trees, noses twitching, ears flicking at the faintest sounds. Theirs is a social species, dependent on subtle cues, body language, scent, touch, to maintain cohesion. Within these groups, dominance hierarchies are gentle, maintained more by positioning than by aggression. Their interactions are full of pauses, gestures of trust that seem to echo the island's broader philosophy: survival not through fear, but through coexistence. So, can curiosity become armor? For the quokka, on this narrow limestone refuge, the answer appears to be yes, but only as long as humans keep playing their accidental role as guardians of noise and light. The moment the island falls silent, the armor thins. Yet perhaps that fragility is part of the lesson, that evolution doesn't draw moral boundaries between wild and tame, between fear and friendliness. It simply tests what works in each place, in each moment. And here, for now, curiosity is protection, a living gamble between two species whose fates have quietly intertwined, bound by the same question that haunts every island on Earth: who protects whom? Over the heat-shimmered plains of Australia, where pasture meets wind and the land breathes in long, dry sighs, a shape suspends itself in defiance of gravity. The Nankeen Kestrel, small, rust-colored, with pale underwings and dark wingtips, hangs in the air as if nailed to the sky. Its tail fans open into a copper triangle, head locked downward, wings trembling in the invisible current. The bird seems motionless, yet beneath that illusion lies exquisite control, hundreds of micro-adjustments in feather pitch and muscle tension countering every gust. To the human eye, it is a marvel of steadiness. To the grass below, it is a signal, one that ripples across species and triggers a quiet reshuffling of life. The kestrel's hover is not mere hunting technique, it is ecological choreography. In a landscape dominated by wind, silence and stillness stand out more sharply than motion. The bird's hovering form becomes a beacon, a sentinel in the sky. Small mammals, mice, voles, and young marsupials detect that stillness instantly, freezing mid-forage or vanishing into cover. In turn, other animals take notice. Grasshoppers leap prematurely, lizards flatten themselves against rock, and magpies adjust their flight paths, wary of what the kestrel might have spotted. What appears to be a predator's private maneuver becomes a public broadcast. a vertical alarm that ripples downward through the web of the plains. The Nankeen Kestrel's ability to hover distinguishes it from most other raptors of its size. It lacks the kestrel's northern cousin's strong thermals or the heavier weight of hawks that rely on soaring. Instead, it balances on the invisible scaffolding of updrafts created by uneven terrain and shifting heat gradients. When the sun warms a hillside or a road's edge, air rises, forming narrow columns of lift. The kestrel positions itself at their crests, facing into the wind, using tail and wings as ailerons to maintain its position. The feat requires not brute strength, but precise timing, adjusting to wind oscillations that can change dozens of times per second. High-speed footage shows how its wingtips blur, even when its body remains steady, an orchestra of movement producing the illusion of none. But the hover is more than physics. It is communication, a cross-species semaphore shaped by evolution. Field researchers placing motion sensors across open paddocks noticed a pattern. Small mammal activity drops sharply when kestrels hover above, even if the bird never dives. Within minutes of the kestrel leaving, the same rodents resume foraging. Over weeks of observation, a secondary effect emerged. Individuals that ignored kestrel silhouettes, the naive ones, were disproportionately preyed upon by ground predators like snakes or goannas shortly afterward. The reason seems counterintuitive. The kestrel's presence flushes prey into cover, but the alarm behavior benefits not just the rodents themselves, it benefits the entire prey community. A single kestrel acting as an airborne sentry conditions the field into cycles of vigilance and rest, shaping when and how other animals move. In evolutionary terms, this relationship may verge on mutualism, an uneasy alliance born of fear. The kestrel gains advantage by testing the surface of the landscape. Each frozen mouse, each scurrying movement gives away a potential meal. Meanwhile, the rest of the community benefits from the bird's predictive power. The kestrel becomes unintentionally a barometer of danger. Its hovering silhouette signals that something, whether kestrel, hawk or snake, is active in the area. Even species that the kestrel never hunts respond to its posture. To them, stillness in the sky means pause. At ground level, the drama unfolds in subtler ways. A brown grass wren picking through seeds suddenly stops, head tilted, eyes skyward. A shadow passes over the plain, briefly breaking the monotony of the sun's glare. The kestrel's wings flutter, but it holds its place, unmoving enough to draw the eye of everything below. The wind hums through the grass, but no movement betrays its prey. Seconds stretch into minutes. Then a twitch of the kestrel's tail, a snap of folded wings, and it drops. A copper blur, a dive so silent it seems absorbed by the air. The strike lasts less than a second. Sometimes it ends in triumph, a small mammal grasped in its talons. Sometimes it ends in nothing but dust and wind. Either way, the system resets. The field exhales. Life resumes. The kestrel's hover is also an act of visibility, a paradoxical risk. Remaining fixed in one place for long periods exposes it to aerial competitors like crows and larger raptors. Yet its size and maneuverability compensate. It keeps its position just below the layer where thermals carry bigger birds, close enough to ground effect to benefit from stability, but high enough to avoid ambush. Each hover represents a finely tuned equilibrium between stealth and announcement, between opportunity and exposure. From an energy standpoint, this stillness is astonishingly efficient. Where a falcon must expend massive bursts of power in pursuit, the kestrel rides physics. Measurements of oxygen consumption show that its hover consumes less than half the energy of sustained flapping flight. The bird capitalizes on dynamic lift, tiny differences in pressure across its wings, to remain aloft almost indefinitely when the wind cooperates. It is not flying so much as balancing, performing an airborne calculus where lift equals gravity plus patience. Beneath the physical mastery lies sensory precision. The kestrel's eyes contain an exceptionally high density of photoreceptors sensitive to ultraviolet light. To it, the landscape below glows with invisible trails, the urine markings of rodents and marsupials that reflect UV wavelengths. These lines form a map of movement and activity, guiding the kestrel's hover to the most promising patches. It can literally see the paths of life written across the grass. When it locks into position, the bird is not guessing. It is reading. And yet, to the other animals below, its stillness signals something different. Danger crystallized in one point of the sky. Drone-mounted loggers tracking kestrel altitude and movement have begun revealing another layer of the story. Hovering kestrels tend to choose consistent heights depending on prey density and wind strength, lower when mammals are active, higher when scanning wider fields. Each hover's position correlates with measurable changes in ground behavior. Small mammals reduce visible foraging by nearly 60% during low-altitude hovers, but by only 25% when the kestrel is higher. The air thus functions as a behavioral broadcast medium, the bird's position encoding levels of perceived threat. It's an ecological Morse code written in height and stillness. Such dynamics ripple outward through the food web. When kestrels are absent, small mammals grow bolder, emerging earlier and staying above ground longer. This in turn attracts snakes, which exploit the abundance. When kestrels return, the snake's success rate drops again. In this way, the kestrel exerts top-down influence not merely through predation, but through perception, controlling behavior by being seen. The open air becomes both stage and signal, where the kestrel's motionlessness communicates across species lines without a sound. There is also beauty in the precision of this control, an elegance that transforms simple survival into artistry. Each hover is tuned to a specific wind speed and direction. When gusts exceed 20 kilometers per hour, the kestrel's tail angle deepens. When they fall below 10, it shifts forward, flapping to maintain position. The head remains eerily stable, a gyroscope of bone and muscle, even as the body trembles. That stability allows the bird's vision to lock onto movement with surgical focus. To watch through binoculars is to see physics and biology merge, chaos above, serenity below, the kestrel an axis around which the landscape momentarily turns. And so the question becomes not just how the kestrel hunts, but what its stillness means. For the prey, it's alarm. For scientists, it's data, a living probe into how ecosystems communicate through motion. For the kestrel itself, it's balance, literal and ecological. By hovering, it bridges air and earth, predator and prey, sound and silence. The plains seem to pause around it, every life form adjusting its rhythm to the kestrel's suspended calm. Is stillness the best signal in the sky? Perhaps it is, because stillness in this world of perpetual motion draws attention like nothing else. It demands recognition. It transforms the unseen into awareness. For the kestrel, that awareness yields food. For everything below, it offers warning. In that brief equilibrium between a hovering predator and a listening field, the Australian plains find their rhythm. Danger measured in grace, survival woven through the silence of a bird that holds the wind and makes the sky speak. In the high canopies of northern Australia, where sunlight fractures through the leaves into shifting green mosaics, a hidden civilization hums in perpetual motion. Branch to branch, leaf to leaf, across a labyrinth of living architecture, the green tree ant, Quokkas smaragdina, builds its empire. To an observer looking up, it is an almost invisible choreography, faint lines of movement that shimmer in the heat, ants crossing gaps between trees on narrow living chains of their own bodies. Yet these bridges are not just feats of engineering, they are instruments of communication. When danger arrives, they tremble. And in those vibrations, entire colonies hear the alarm. Each colony can span several neighboring trees, housing hundreds of thousands of ants. Their nests, stitched from leaves and silk spun by larvae, cluster in the canopy like green lanterns. To connect them, the ants weave an intricate infrastructure of trails, highways of scent and muscle that thread through the forest air. These are not fixed routes. They flex, sag and reform as the trees sway in the wind. When branches grow apart or storms shift the canopy, the ants respond instantly. They link legs, lock jaws, and form bridges of living bodies, an evolutionary solution where architecture and biology merge. Every bridge is a suspension structure of minds and muscles, each ant both individual and component. But the bridge's function extends beyond transit. It also carries information. When a threat appears, a predatory spider, a rival colony, or a human hand brushing too close, the first responders raise their abdomens and release alarm pheromones, chemical cries that spread along the surface of the bridge. Yet in the dense humidity of the forest, chemicals disperse unevenly. Air currents twist, humidity dampens scent, and the signal can fade before reaching distant nests. Evolution has found a backup channel: vibration. The living bridge itself becomes a physical conduit of alarm, trembling with the footsteps of danger. High-speed sensors placed on these ant bridges reveal a complex symphony of motion. When the leading ants sense threat, they drum the substrate with their bodies, minute impacts that send ripples through the chain. The vibrations travel faster than the chemical cues, activating defensive postures down the line in less than half a second. The pattern is not random. It carries amplitude, frequency, and rhythm, each combination triggering a different response. A low, continuous tremor might signal distant disturbance. A sharp, pulsing beat might mean an immediate attack. What to us would sound like faint, dry rustling becomes, for the ants, a coded siren system, a seismic language flowing through living bridges. The result is extraordinary coordination. Within seconds of a vibration surge, distant workers at the far end of a bridge, even those separated by several meters, begin reinforcing nest walls or tightening their grip on neighboring leaves. Soldiers race along the line toward the disturbance, guided not by sight or scent, but by the oscillations pulsing through their own limbs. In effect, the colony turns its infrastructure into a nervous system. Where vertebrates send electric signals through nerves, green ants send mechanical waves through the bodies of their own workers. The bridge is nerve, conduit, and messenger all at once. To watch this unfold under magnification is to witness the frontier of social evolution. Each ant contributes only a fragment of awareness, a twitch, a turn, a grip. Yet the sum produces intelligence on the scale of the forest. When a gust bends the trees, the ants compensate, redistributing their weight along the bridge to absorb motion without panic. But when the motion carries the distinct cadence of predator movement, irregular, heavy, arrhythmic. The pattern triggers alarm. The ants' sensory hairs, tuned to vibrations as subtle as a few microns, detect the difference between wind and threat. What seems to us chaotic tremor is, to them, a recognizable voice of danger. The ecological consequences extend far beyond the colony. Green ants are dominant canopy predators. Their patrols influence entire food webs. When their bridges signal alarm, other species respond. Tree hoppers, which share mutualistic relationships with the ants, retreat behind stems or freeze. Geckos and skinks that hunt near the nests alter their paths. Even the plant leaves themselves respond indirectly. Research shows that the ant's defensive rush deters herbivorous insects, reducing leaf damage across multiple trees. A single vibration cascade can thus ripple through a miniature ecosystem, curbing feeding, dispersing competitors, and resetting the rhythm of life in the canopy. To test these dynamics, researchers mount vibration sensors on natural bridges and record response times to simulated disturbances. The results are staggering. Within 0.3 seconds of the first tremor, soldiers at the nearest nest entrances emerge. Within 2 seconds, distant nests linked by multiple bridges show movement. Chemical signals alone cannot account for such speed. The only plausible medium is the mechanical wave, a pulse traveling through the living fabric of the colony's infrastructure. It is as if the ants have evolved their own telegraph network, one powered not by copper wire, but by living chains of muscle and chitin. This vibration-based communication does not replace chemical signaling, it amplifies it. The green ant colony operates like a dual-channel network. Chemicals provide persistence and context, while vibrations provide urgency and direction. Together, they form a hybrid warning system uniquely suited to the fluid geometry of the canopy. Where pheromones might drift away in wind, vibrations anchor the message in matter. It is a design principle found again and again in nature, redundancy as resilience. But here, embodied in creatures no larger than rice grains, it achieves near instantaneous synchronization across tens of meters of forest. Watching a bridge in action reveals the delicate balance between order and chaos. The ants grip one another in a tensile web that flexes with each passing breeze. When alarm ripples through, the entire bridge seems to quiver like a plucked string, yet it never breaks. Instead, it tightens. Each ant reinforces its grip, muscles contracting in perfect microsecond sequence. The signal that could have caused collapse becomes paradoxically a stabilizer. This is not coincidence but design. The colony's communication doubles as its structural defense. The very act of broadcasting alarm strengthens the network it travels through. The green ant's strategy hints at something profound about evolution's inventiveness. While most species rely on organs to detect and transmit information, these ants have externalized the process into their environment. Their architecture is their sensorium. The boundaries between body, tool, and habitat dissolve. This extended organism, a living mesh spanning trees, acts as both creature and ecosystem component. Its bridge sirens are not just messages within the colony, they are acoustic threads tying separate trees into a single living domain. When the bridge trembles, the forest listens. There is irony here too. The green ant's alarm system evolved for defense, yet its presence can be interpreted by other animals as opportunity. Certain predatory spiders have learned to mimic the vibrations of benign movement, crossing ant bridges undetected to ambush workers. Some parasitic flies hover nearby, waiting for the chaos of a false alarm to deposit their eggs on distracted ants. The bridge siren, for all its sophistication, is not invulnerable. Every message sent into the environment is a message that can be overheard. And yet, the system endures because its efficiency outweighs its risks. In the deep silence of midday, when even the cicadas pause, the green ant colonies hum with faint rhythmic tension, an architecture under constant conversation. The bridges stretch and sway, their surfaces alive with traffic. Somewhere, a twig snaps, perhaps from a monitor lizard moving through the canopy. A tremor runs down the line. Instantly, the bridge tightens, the ants reposition, and the siren hums without sound. A vibration too low for human ears, but strong enough to summon hundreds of defenders from across the treetops. The alarm has traveled, invisible and wordless, across living ground. So can a bridge become a siren. In the green ant's world, it already has. It hums warnings not through air, but through the bodies of the colony itself, turning cooperation into communication and architecture into alarm. It is a reminder that evolution never wastes a structure, it repurposes it. What began as a bridge for travel became a bridge for meaning. A line through the forest where danger and design meet, and where in every trembling leaf the language of survival still vibrates.